Hold on, you're not dying here. Zara Mitchell's voice cracked with determination as she knelt beside Ethan Caldwell, her hands pressing against his blood-soaked shirt in a freezing Chicago alley. Her radiant brown skin glistened with sweat, long black hair spilling over her shoulders, defying the chaos around her. A pregnant, homeless black woman risking everything to save a stranger, her courage would unravel a story that shook an empire. This is more than a tale of survival. It's a journey of truth, redemption, and a bond forged in fire. From a crumbling warehouse to a corporate boardroom, Zara's defiance and Ethan's awakening will leave you breathless. If this grips your heart, hit subscribe and share where you're watching from. Chicago, New York, or beyond, day or night. Her secret, buried by power, changed everything. Stick around to see how one woman's truth rebuilt a future. The Chicago wind howled like a wounded animal, tearing through the narrow alley behind Caldwell Enterprises as dusk bled into night. It was December, and the city's pulse thrummed with the chaos of rush hour, honking cabs, the distant screech of a train, the shuffle of commuters buried in their coats. Ethan Caldwell, 38, CEO of a tech empire worth billions, stepped out of the glass tower's back exit, his navy wool coat flapping against his tailored suit. His breath clouded in the frigid air, his polished loafers clicking against the uneven pavement. He was late for a gala, his phone buzzing with texts from his assistant, James, about investors waiting at the venue. Ethan's mind was elsewhere. Stock dips, a looming board meeting, his sister Lauren's cryptic email about cleaning up loose ends. He didn't see the shadows shift in the alley's mouth. 3 figures emerged from the dark, hoods low, faces obscured. They moved fast, silent as wolves. Ethan's instincts kicked in too late. A metal pipe glinted under a flickering streetlight, arcing toward his head. Pain exploded behind his eyes as the pipe connected, a sickening crack echoing off the brick walls. He stumbled, his phone clattering to the ground, screen shattering. Blood, warm and metallic, trickled down his temple. The world tilted. Another blow landed on his ribs and he gasped, collapsing onto the icy pavement. His vision blurred, the alley spinning into a haze of gray and black. The attackers loomed, their boots scuffing closer. One muttered something low, guttural, a threat, a command. Ethan's heart pounded, each beat weaker, his fingers clawing at the ground. He was slipping, the cold seeping into his bones, when a voice sliced through the fog. "Hold on, you're not dying here." The words were sharp, desperate, laced with a fire that jolted Ethan's fading consciousness. A woman's voice, raw and commanding, cut through the alley's din. Zara Mitchell burst into the scene like a storm, her pregnant frame silhouetted against the dim glow of a neon sign. Her radiant brown skin glistened with sweat despite the biting cold, her long black hair spilling over her shoulders, swaying as she charged forward. Her coat, a threadbare relic stained with grime, did little to hide her swollen belly, but her presence was electric. She was no older than 30, her beauty undeniable even in her tattered state. Eyes fierce, jaw set, a plank of splintered wood gripped in her trembling hands. "Get away from him!" she roared, swinging the plank with a ferocity that sent the attackers stumbling back. The men froze, caught off guard. Zara's voice didn't waver, though her heart raced for the child she carried. She stepped closer, her torn sneakers crunching on broken glass, her eyes locked on the hooded figures. "I said move!" she shouted, her breath visible in the freezing air. The leader, a wiry man with a scar visible under his hood, sneered, raising the pipe again. Zara didn't flinch. She swung the plank, catching his wrist with a thud. He cursed, dropping the weapon, and the others hesitated, their bravado crumbling under her glare. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer. The attackers exchanged glances, then bolted, their footsteps fading into the city's hum. Zara stood panting, the plank slipping from her hands, her body trembling from adrenaline and fear. She dropped to her knees beside Ethan, her fingers fumbling for his pulse. His skin was clammy, his face pale under the blood streaking from his temple. "Come on," she whispered, her voice softer now, almost a plea. She pressed her hands against his chest, feeling for a heartbeat, her own pounding in her ears. The alley smelled of damp concrete and coppery blood, the cold biting at her exposed fingers. Zara's hair fell forward, brushing Ethan's face as she leaned closer, checking his breathing. It was shallow, ragged, but there. "You're not leaving me yet," she murmured, her hands shaking as she tore a strip from her scarf, pressing it to his head to slow the bleeding. Her eyes darted around, scanning for help, but the alley was empty, the city indifferent. Ethan's vision flickered, catching glimpses of her face. Those fierce eyes, the curve of her cheek, the way her lips moved as she muttered to herself, counting seconds, willing him to stay alive. There was something familiar in her gaze, a spark he couldn't place, like a memory just out of reach. His chest ached, each breath a struggle, but her voice anchored him, pulling him back from the edge. The sirens grew deafening, red and blue lights flashing at the alley's entrance. Zara's head snapped up, her body tensing. She glanced at Ethan one last time, her expression unreadable. Part relief, part fear. "You're going to be okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then as quickly as she'd appeared, she was gone, slipping into the shadows as paramedics rushed in. The alley erupted into chaos. Shouts, the clatter of a stretcher, the crackle of radios. "Male, late 30s, head trauma, possible concussion," a paramedic barked, kneeling beside Ethan. They worked fast, stabilizing his neck, checking his vitals. Ethan's eyes fluttered, searching for her, but the alley was a blur of uniforms and lights. "Where is she?" he rasped, his voice weak, barely audible. The paramedic frowned, assuming he was delirious. "Just hang on, sir," she said, securing an oxygen mask over his face. Ethan's hand twitched, reaching for the ghost of her presence, but the cold pavement was all that answered. As the ambulance sped through Chicago's neon-lit streets, Ethan's mind clung to her image, her radiant skin, her hair like a dark cascade, her eyes burning with a strength that defied her circumstances. Who was she? A homeless woman? The paramedics had muttered, but that didn't fit. She wasn't just a stranger passing through the night. Her voice, her courage, the way she'd risked everything for him. It felt personal, like a debt he didn't know he owed. His head throbbed, pain radiating from the wound. But it was her face that kept him conscious, a beacon in the fog of his fading thoughts. The hospital loomed ahead, its white lights stark against the night sky. Ethan was wheeled into the ER, the world a haze of beeping monitors and antiseptic smells. Nurses swarmed, checking his pupils, stitching the gash on his head. James arrived, pale and flustered, clutching his tablet. "Mr. Caldwell, thank God you're alive," he stammered, pushing up his glasses. "The police are looking into it. Random mugging, they think." Ethan shook his head, wincing at the movement. "Not random," he croaked. "The woman, she saved me. Find her." James blinked, confused. "Sir, no one saw her clearly. The cameras in the alley were down. Just some vagrant, they said." Ethan's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the hospital bed's rails. "She wasn't a vagrant," he said, his voice sharp despite the pain. "She knew what she was doing. She mattered." His words hung in the air, heavy with a truth he couldn't yet grasp. The monitors beeped steadily, marking the rhythm of his survival. But Ethan's mind was elsewhere, chasing a woman who'd vanished as quickly as she'd saved him. Outside, the city churned on, oblivious to the moment that had changed everything. Zara Mitchell, her coat flapping in the wind, slipped through the crowds, her heart still racing. She touched her belly, feeling the faint kick of her son, Elijah, and whispered, "We did good, little man." But her eyes were wary, scanning the shadows. She'd saved a life, but at what cost? The man she'd pulled from death's grip wasn't just anyone. He was Ethan Caldwell, a name tied to her past, to the ruin of her life. As she disappeared into the night, the weight of her secret pressed harder than the cold ever could. The hospital room was a sterile cage, its fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped insects. Ethan Caldwell lay propped against starched pillows, the steady beep of the heart monitor a metronome to his racing thoughts. The stitches on his temple itched, a dull throb pulsing beneath the bandage. But the pain was nothing compared to the image burned into his mind. A woman, radiant and fierce, her long black hair spilling over her shoulders, her brown skin glowing under the alley's dim neon. Zara Mitchell. Her name was a whisper he hadn't yet spoken, but her face, those eyes sharp with courage and something deeper, something familiar, haunted him. She'd saved his life, risked her own, and vanished into Chicago's frozen night like a ghost. Ethan's fingers tightened around the bedrail, his jaw set. He needed to find her. Outside, the city woke under a gray dawn, the skyline jagged against a sky heavy with snow. Inside, the room felt smaller with every passing minute. James Porter, Ethan's assistant, stood by the window, his wiry frame hunched over a tablet, scrolling through emails and news alerts. "Mr. Caldwell, the police are still investigating the attack," James said, his voice clipped, glasses glinting as he glanced up. "They're calling it a random mugging. The PR team's drafting a statement to keep the press at bay." Ethan barely heard him. His eyes were fixed on the door as if she might walk through it, her tattered coat trailing, her voice cutting through the haze again. "Hold on. You're not dying here." "James," Ethan interrupted, his voice rough from the oxygen mask he'd worn hours ago. "The woman who saved me, what do we know?" James blinked, caught off guard. He adjusted his glasses, stalling. "Sir, there's not much. No one got her name. The alley cameras were vandalized, probably by the attackers. A few witnesses mentioned a homeless woman, pregnant, maybe unstable. They said she was yelling, swinging a plank like she was possessed." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Unstable?" The word tasted bitter. "She wasn't unstable. She was fearless." He saw her again in his mind, charging into danger, her swollen belly no match for her fire. "Find her." James shifted uncomfortably, tapping his tablet. "Sir, the police checked. No ID, no clear description. She was gone before the paramedics arrived. Probably just a drifter passing through." Ethan's hand slammed against the bed rail, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "She wasn't a drifter," he snapped. "She knew what she was doing. She saved my life, James. I owe her." His voice softened, almost a whisper. "I need to know who she is." James nodded, though his eyes betrayed doubt. "I'll make some calls, sir. But the board's already breathing down my neck about your appearance at the gala tonight. They're worried about stock prices if you don't show." Ethan waved him off, his gaze drifting to the window. The city sprawled below, a maze of steel and glass, hiding her somewhere in its shadows. The tabloids were already feasting. "Billionaire CEO attacked, saved by mystery woman." Screaming headlines plastered his face across every newsstand, but none mentioned her, only vague whispers of a vagrant or crazed bystander. Ethan's chest tightened. She wasn't a bystander. She was a force, a storm that had blown through his life and left him grasping for answers. Why had she run? And why did her face feel like a memory he couldn't place? Hours later, discharged from the hospital, Ethan sat in the back of his black SUV, the leather seats cold against his bruised ribs. His driver navigated Chicago's crowded streets, but Ethan's eyes scanned the sidewalks, searching for her. Every figure in a worn coat made his pulse quicken, only to deflate when it wasn't her. He rubbed his temple, the stitches pulling under his fingers. "James," he said, his voice low, "check the security footage again. Every camera within a block of that alley. I don't care if it's grainy. I want her face." James, seated beside him, hesitated. "Sir, the PR team thinks we should let this go. The story's already spinning out of control. People saying she might be dangerous, a liability. We don't want to stir up more." "I don't give a damn about PR," Ethan cut in, his voice like steel. "She's not dangerous. She's the only reason I'm breathing." James swallowed, nodding, and tapped out a message on his tablet. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes, her image flashing again, her hair catching the neon light, her hands steady as she pressed the scarf to his wound. There was something in her eyes, not just courage, but pain, a grief that felt personal. He'd seen it before, hadn't he? A boardroom years ago, a young woman with that same fire, dismissed with a laugh. The memory was a splinter, sharp and buried deep. Back at Caldwell Enterprises, Ethan's corner office on the 50th floor was a fortress of glass and steel, the city glittering below like a promise of control. But control felt like a lie now. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection pale, the bandage on his head stark against his dark hair. The attack had shaken him, not just physically but deeper, in a place he hadn't touched in years. He was Ethan Caldwell, untouchable, a man who built empires with a signature. Yet a stranger, a pregnant, homeless woman, had been his salvation. His fingers grazed the bandage, her voice echoing, "You're not dying here." He needed to know why she'd cared enough to save him and why she'd fled. James knocked, entering with a stack of papers and a nervous frown. "Sir, I reached out to the police and private security firms. No leads on the woman. But," he hesitated, glancing at the door, "there's something else. The attack wasn't random. The police found a burner phone one of the thugs dropped. It had texts about taking care of Caldwell. They're looking into it, but it's sensitive." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Sensitive how?" James lowered his voice. "The text mentioned LC. Could be a coincidence, but..." Ethan's jaw tightened. LC. Lauren Caldwell, his sister, the CFO with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. He pushed the thought away. "Focus on the woman, James. I want every scrap of footage, every witness statement. Now." Alone again, Ethan sank into his chair, the city's lights blurring beyond the glass. He opened his laptop, pulling up news articles about the attack. Social media was ablaze. Clips from bystanders' phones, shaky footage of the alley. He froze on one video, a grainy Instagram post from a teenager nearby. There she was, just for a second, her face half turned toward the camera as she knelt over him. The image was blurry, but her eyes cut through the pixels. Fierce, haunted, alive. Ethan's heart pounded. She wasn't just a savior, she was a puzzle, a piece of his world he'd overlooked. He slowed the video, frame by frame, her hair a dark cascade, her hands steady despite the chaos. There was something else in her expression, something that hit him like a fist. Recognition. She'd known who he was. Ethan leaned back, his breath uneven. The attack, the texts, her face. It was all connected, wasn't it? He opened the company's HR database, fingers trembling as he typed Mitchell into the search bar. A single file appeared. Zara Mitchell, data analyst, terminated 3 years ago. No photo, no details, just a curt note. Dismissed for breach of conduct. His stomach twisted. Conduct? She'd saved his life, risked her own, and his company had cast her out. He clicked the file, but it was locked, sealed under high-level clearance. Lauren's clearance. The splinter in his memory sharpened, a young woman's voice echoing from years ago, warning of numbers that didn't add up, silenced by laughter. Had that been Zara? He stood, pacing, the city's pulse mocking his own. Zara Mitchell wasn't just a hero who'd vanished. She was a ghost from his past, a truth his empire had buried. And now she'd pulled him back from death, only to slip away again. Ethan's hands clenched. He wouldn't let her disappear. Not this time. The Chicago skyline glittered like a jagged crown, but Ethan Caldwell's world felt like it was crumbling. His office on the 50th floor of Caldwell Enterprises was a sterile fortress, its glass walls reflecting the city's restless energy. The bandage on his temple itched, a constant reminder of the alley, the pipe, the blood, and her, Zara Mitchell. Her name was a pulse in his mind, her face a vivid imprint. Radiant brown skin, long black hair spilling over her shoulders, eyes blazing with a fire that had yanked him back from the edge of death. She'd saved him, a pregnant, homeless woman who'd faced down thugs with nothing but a plank and her will. And then she'd vanished, leaving Ethan grasping at shadows. He stood by the window, his reflection pale, his hands clenched. He had to find her. The past 3 days had been a blur of board meetings, investor calls, and James's frantic updates about the attack. The police had no leads on the thugs, only that cryptic text about LC on the burner phone. Lauren Caldwell, his sister, had dismissed it with a laugh when Ethan mentioned it over dinner, her green eyes cool, her smile too perfect. "You're paranoid, Ethan," she'd said, sipping her wine. "Focus on the gala, not conspiracy theories." But Ethan couldn't focus. Not on stock prices, not on the company's latest AI venture, not on anything but Zara. Her courage, her desperation, the way her gaze had locked onto his in that alley, it wasn't just a rescue, it was personal, and he needed to know why. He sat at his desk, the glow of his laptop casting harsh light across his face. The HR file on Zara Mitchell stared back at him, locked behind a clearance he didn't have, dismissed for breach of conduct. The phrase was a slap, vague and corporate, reeking of a cover-up. He'd tried accessing it again last night, but the system blocked him, demanding Lauren's approval. His sister's name kept circling back. First the attack, now this. Ethan's jaw tightened. He slammed the laptop shut and grabbed his coat. "James," he called, his voice sharp enough to make his assistant jump from his desk outside. James appeared, tablet in hand, glasses slipping down his nose. "Sir, the board's expecting your presentation in—" "Forget the board," Ethan snapped, pulling on his coat. "We're going downtown, now." James blinked, flustered. "Downtown? Sir, the gala's tonight. The investors—" "I said now." Ethan's tone left no room for argument. He strode past James, his heart pounding with a mix of determination and dread. Zara was out there, somewhere in Chicago's underbelly, and he wouldn't sit in his ivory tower while she slipped through his fingers again. The SUV cut through the city's gray slush, its wipers battling a light snow. Ethan's eyes scanned the streets, every alley and corner a potential hiding place. James sat beside him, nervously tapping his tablet. "Sir, I pulled what I could from the police reports. Witnesses at the alley mentioned a woman matching her description. Pregnant, black, long hair, wearing a ratty coat. They said she hangs around the soup kitchens on West Madison." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed outside. West Madison was Chicago's Skid Row, a stretch of shelters and abandoned lots where the city's forgotten survived. The thought of Zara there, pregnant and alone, twisted something in his chest. They parked near a squat brick building, its sign reading Hope Haven Soup Kitchen in faded paint. The air smelled of wet asphalt and cheap coffee, the street alive with bundled figures shuffling through the cold. Ethan stepped out, his breath clouding, his eyes darting over the crowd. James trailed behind, muttering about schedules. Inside, the soup kitchen hummed with quiet desperation. Clinking spoons, murmured conversations, the shuffle of trays. Volunteers moved with practiced efficiency, serving stew to a line of weary faces. And then he saw her. Zara stood behind a counter, ladling soup into bowls, her long hair tucked under a faded scarf, her brown skin glowing under the fluorescent lights. Her coat was gone, replaced by a worn sweater that hugged her pregnant belly. She moved with purpose, her hands steady, but her eyes, those fierce, haunted eyes, scanned the room like she was waiting for a threat. Ethan's heart lurched. "That's her," he whispered, stepping forward. James grabbed his arm. "Sir, you can't just—" Ethan shook him off, his voice low. "Stay here." He approached slowly, weaving through the crowd, his polished shoes out of place on the scuffed linoleum. Zara's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto his. For a moment, time stopped. Her gaze was a storm of fear and recognition, her lips parting slightly. "Ma'am," Ethan called, his voice softer than he intended. "I just want to talk." Her face hardened, and before he could take another step, she dropped the ladle, turned, and bolted through a back door, her sweater catching on a chair as she fled. "Zara!" Ethan shouted, ignoring the stares of the crowd. He pushed past a volunteer, nearly knocking over a tray, and sprinted after her. The back door led to an alley, its walls slick with ice, the air sharp with the stench of garbage. Zara was already halfway down, her movements quick despite her pregnancy. "Wait!" Ethan called, his loafers slipping on the frozen ground. She glanced back, her eyes wide with panic, then darted around a corner, disappearing into the maze of back streets. Ethan stopped, panting, his breath a white cloud in the cold. His ribs ached from the attack, but the pain in his chest was something else. Frustration, guilt, a desperate need to understand. Back in the SUV, James was pale, clutching his tablet like a lifeline. "Sir, that was reckless. What if someone recognized you? The press? I don't care about the press, Ethan growled, slamming the door. She's running from something, from me. He leaned back, his mind racing. Why had she looked at him like that? Not just fear, but betrayal, as if he'd already let her down. He turned to James. Get me everything on Zara Mitchell. Every file, every email, every scrap of paper. I don't care what it takes. James nodded, typing furiously. Sir, if she's tied to the company, it could open a can of worms. The board won't like it. Ethan's eyes darkened. The board can wait? She can't. That night, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, the city's lights sprawling beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. A glass of bourbon sat untouched on the table, its amber glow mocking his restlessness. He opened his laptop again, replaying the grainy Instagram video from the alley. There she was, kneeling over him, her hair a dark cascade, her hands steady as she pressed the scarf to his head. He paused the frame, her face blurry but unmistakable. Those eyes, they weren't just saving him. They were accusing him too. He leaned closer, his breath catching. She'd known who he was, not just a CEO, but Ethan Caldwell. How? He pulled up the HR file again, staring at the locked screen. Zara Mitchell, terminated 3 years ago. The memory was there, teasing him. A boardroom, a young woman with long hair, her voice trembling as she presented data. Lauren's sharp laughter cutting her off. Ethan's stomach churned. Had he been there? Had he ignored her too? He opened a new tab, searching social media for any trace of her. A few blurry photos surfaced. Zara at a shelter, serving food, her smile tight but genuine. One caption read, "Local hero at Hope Haven, always helping." Hero. The word hit him like a punch. Ethan stood pacing, the city's hum a distant roar. Zara wasn't just a woman who'd saved him. She was a piece of his company's past, a truth he'd overlooked. And now she was running, not just from danger, but from him. His hands clenched. He wouldn't stop until he found her, until he understood why she'd risked everything for a man whose world had already failed her. Ethan Caldwell's office was a tomb of silence. The city's glow beyond the glass, a distant hum. The bandage on his temple felt tighter, a nagging reminder of the alley and Zara Mitchell's hands pulling him back from the void. Her face, radiant brown skin, long black hair, eyes fierce with purpose, haunted him, a puzzle piece that didn't fit the polished world of Caldwell Enterprises. The locked HR file on his laptop screen mocked him. Zara Mitchell, dismissed for breach of conduct. The words were sterile, corporate, but they carried a weight Ethan couldn't ignore. 3 years ago, she'd been part of his empire, a data analyst with promise, and now she was a ghost on Chicago streets. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk, his mind racing. What had his company done to her? He'd spent the night digging, bypassing James's cautious updates and the board's demands for his gala appearance. The Instagram video from the alley played on a loop in his head. Zara's steady hands, her voice cutting through the chaos. You're not dying here. But it was the look in her eyes, a flicker of recognition and pain, that gnawed him. She hadn't just saved a stranger, she'd saved him, Ethan Caldwell, and then fled as if he were the threat. The locked file was a dead end, but Ethan wasn't a man who accepted walls. He picked up his phone, dialing James, his voice low and urgent. Get me access to Zara Mitchell's file. Override the clearance. I don't care how. James's voice crackled through, hesitant. Sir, that's Lauren's domain. HR records from 3 years ago are sealed under her authority. If I push, it'll raise flags. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Then let them rise. Do it. He hung up, his pulse quickening. Lauren. His sister's name kept surfacing. First the burner phone's LC text, now this. Her cool dismissal of the attack, her sharp smile over dinner, felt like pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to solve. But Zara deserved answers, and Ethan was done looking away. By morning, James arrived, pale and clutching a thin folder. This is all I could get without tripping alarms, he said, sliding it across the desk. HR wouldn't budge, but I found an old backup from the data archives. It's not much, but... Ethan flipped it open, his eyes scanning the pages. Zara Mitchell, hired at 24, a rising star in the analytics team. Her performance reviews glowed. Innovative, meticulous, a problem solver, until the final entry, dated 3 years ago. A single line, cold and final, terminated for falsifying data in insubordination. Ethan's stomach twisted. Falsifying data? The woman who'd risked her life for him didn't strike him as a liar. He turned the page, finding a memo signed by Lauren Caldwell. Immediate dismissal recommended. Employee poses risk to company integrity. Ethan's hands shook as he read further. Zara had flagged discrepancies in a $200 million contract for a renewable energy project. Funds misallocated, payments funneled to an offshore account. Her report, detailed and damning, had been submitted to Lauren directly. 2 days later, Zara was gone, her name smeared, her career erased. Ethan's breath caught. He remembered that project, Lauren's pet initiative, celebrated in press releases as a triumph of green tech. He'd signed off on it, distracted by a merger, trusting his sister's numbers. Had he signed off on Zara's ruin too? He stood, pacing, the folder clutched in his hand. A memory flickered. A boardroom 3 years ago, a young woman with long black hair, her voice steady but nervous as she presented slides. "The numbers don't add up," she'd said, pointing to a chart. Lauren had cut her off, her laugh sharp, dismissing her as overzealous. Ethan had been there, half listening, his mind on a deal. He hadn't questioned it. Now that moment burned. Zara's face in the alley wasn't just familiar. It was the same woman, her fire undimmed despite what they'd done to her. "James," Ethan said, his voice low. "Who handled Zara's termination?" James swallowed, glancing at the door. Lauren signed the order, but it was fast-tracked. No investigation, no appeal. HR flagged her as a troublemaker, said she fabricated the data to stir drama. Ethan's jaw clenched. Fabricated? She was a whistleblower. James nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "There's more. She tried to escalate it, filed a complaint with legal, even reached out to you directly. Emails, calls, all blocked. Lauren's team buried it." Ethan sank into his chair, the folder falling to the desk. Buried. Zara had tried to reach him, and he'd never known. He saw her now, in that alley, her hands pressing life back into him, her eyes holding a grief he hadn't understood. She wasn't just saving him, she was defying the empire that had crushed her. His company, his family, his sister. The weight of it hit like a blow, heavier than the pipe in the alley. "Lauren," he muttered, the name bitter on his tongue. His sister, the golden CFO, always one step ahead, her charm a shield. Had she known Zara would end up on the streets? Pregnant, alone, blacklisted? He opened his laptop, pulling up the company's old project archives. The renewable energy contract was still there, buried in subfolders, its numbers polished to perfection. But Zara's report, attached to an internal email, told a different story. Millions siphoned to a shell company, signatures forged, environmental audits faked. Ethan's heart pounded. This wasn't a mistake, it was a crime. And Lauren had orchestrated it, painting Zara as the villain to protect her own legacy. Ethan's hands trembled as he forwarded the report to his private email. He needed proof, hard evidence, before confronting her. He stood, moving to the window, the city a blur of steel and snow. Zara was out there, surviving in a world his company had pushed her into. He saw her face again, not just in the alley but in that boardroom, young and hopeful, believing in truth. He'd failed her then, but he wouldn't now. "James," he said, turning, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "Find her again. Check every shelter, every soup kitchen. I want her story, not the company's version." James hesitated. "Sir, if this gets out, it could tank the stock. Lauren will—" "Let her try," Ethan cut in, his eyes hard. "This isn't about the company anymore. It's about her." That night, Ethan drove alone to West Madison. The soup kitchen's lights a faint glow against the dark. He parked a block away, his coat pulled tight, his breath clouding in the cold. The street was alive with shadows, people huddled in doorways, their eyes wary. He stepped inside Hope Haven, the smell of stew and coffee heavy in the air. Zara wasn't there. A volunteer, An older woman with kind eyes recognized him from the news. "You looking for her, aren't you?" she said, wiping her hands on an apron. "The one who saved you." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "She comes and goes," the woman said. "Helps out, then disappears. Got a lot of ghosts, that one." Ethan left, his chest aching. Zara wasn't just hiding from him. She was hiding from a world that had turned its back on her. He drove past the alley where she'd saved him, the neon sign flickering above. Her voice echoed in his mind, fierce and unyielding. "You're not dying here." But it wasn't just his life she'd saved. It was something deeper, a spark of truth he'd ignored for too long. He gripped the steering wheel, his resolve hardening. Zara Mitchell had exposed a rot in his empire, and he'd buried it. Now he'd unearth it, no matter the cost. For her, for the child she carried, and for the man he was starting to become. Ethan Caldwell's SUV crawled through Chicago's snow-dusted streets, the city's pulse a distant thrum against his racing heart. The folder on Zara Mitchell, now creased from his grip, lay on the passenger seat, a damning archive of his company's betrayal. Zara, the woman who'd saved him from death's grip in that alley, wasn't just a hero. She was a casualty of Caldwell Enterprises, her life dismantled by his sister Lauren's hand. Ethan's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he navigated toward West Madison, the soup kitchen's faint glow a beacon in his mind. He'd seen Zara there once, fleetingly, her radiant brown skin and long black hair, unmistakable even in her faded sweater. She'd run from him then, her eyes sharp with fear and something deeper, betrayal. Tonight, he wouldn't let her slip away. The warehouse loomed ahead, a crumbling relic of Chicago's industrial past, its windows jagged like broken teeth. Ethan parked a block away, his breath clouding in the frigid air as he stepped out, his coat no shield against the chill of what he was about to face. The alley attack, the locked HR file, Lauren's name on Zara's dismissal. They were threads of a truth he'd ignored for too long. He moved quietly, his loafers crunching on ice, guided by a tip from the soup kitchen volunteer. Zara was here, hiding in the shadows of a place his company had helped reduce to rubble. The irony wasn't lost on him. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of decay, peeling paint, rusted beams, the air thick with mildew. A faint light flickered from a doorway at the end of a corridor. Ethan's heart pounded as he approached, his steps careful on the uneven floor. He pushed the door open, and there she was. Zara Mitchell stood by a cracked window, her pregnant silhouette stark against the moonlight. Her long hair fell over her shoulders, her brown skin catching the faint glow, her hands resting protectively on her belly. She wore the same worn sweater, her torn coat draped over a crate. Her eyes snapped to him, wide with alarm, then narrowed into something harder. Resignation, maybe anger. "Zara Mitchell," Ethan said softly, his voice trembling with the weight of her name. She froze, her shoulders stiffening. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low, edged with a bitterness that cut deeper than the cold. Ethan raised his hands, palms open, stepping closer. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk." Zara's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Talk? Now you want to talk?" She turned to face him fully, her eyes blazing, her beauty undimmed by the exhaustion etched into her face. "You had 3 years to talk, Mr. Caldwell." "You didn't." Ethan's chest tightened, her words a blade sinking into his guilt. "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know what they did to you." He took another step, the folder heavy in his hand. "I found your file, the report you wrote, the contract discrepancies. Lauren buried it. She buried you." Zara's eyes flickered, a storm of emotions crossing her face. Pain, defiance, a flicker of hope quickly smothered. "You think showing up here with apologies fixes anything?" she said, her voice rising. "Your sister didn't just fire me. She made sure I had nothing. No job, no home, no name. I'm out here because of her, because of you." Ethan flinched, the truth landing like a blow. He saw her now, not just as the woman who'd saved him, but as the young analyst in that boardroom 3 years ago, her voice steady as she'd pointed out numbers that didn't add up, only to be laughed out by Lauren. He'd been there, distracted, complicit in his silence. I'm sorry, he whispered, the words inadequate, raw. Zara shook her head, stepping back, her hand brushing the crate where a stack of papers lay. Dog-eared, stained, but unmistakably company documents. Sorry doesn't give me back my life, she said. I was 24, Ethan. I believed in your company. I thought truth mattered. She turned away, her gaze fixed on the window, the city's lights a cruel reminder of the world she'd been cast out of. I saved you for my son, Elijah, she said, her voice softening, almost breaking. So he'd know his mom didn't let hate win. Not because you deserved it. Ethan's throat tightened, her words slicing through him. He saw the crate now. Folders, USB drives, scraps of paper, all marked with Caldwell Enterprises logo. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara's eyes met his, fierce and unyielding. Everything your sister tried to erase, she said. I made copies before they wiped my system. Contracts, emails, and proof of the money she funneled offshore. I tried to tell you. I emailed, called, and stood outside your tower like a fool. You walked past me. Ethan's knees buckled, the memory crashing back. A young woman outside the building, her face blurred by his haste, her voice drowned by his indifference. He sank onto a rusted chair, the folder slipping from his hand. I didn't see you, he said, his voice hollow. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, Zara snapped, her voice cracking like ice. Your sister made sure no one listened. A black girl accusing America's tech golden family? I was nothing to you people. She touched her belly, her eyes glistening. But I'm not nothing to him. Ethan looked at her, really looked. Her strength, her pain, the fire that hadn't dimmed despite everything. Why save me then? He asked, his voice barely audible. After all we did? Zara's gaze softened, just for a moment. Because that moment wasn't about you, she said. It was about Elijah. I want him to grow up in a world where we don't let people die, no matter who they are. She paused, her voice steadying. But don't think I did it for you. I regret it some nights, knowing who you are. Ethan's heart stopped, her words a mirror to his shame. He stood, stepping closer, careful not to crowd her. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I need to make this right. Tell me how. Zara's eyes narrowed, searching his face for lies. You can't, she said, her voice firm. You can't undo 3 years of silence. Your company blacklisted me. Your sister made sure every door slammed shut. She gestured to the warehouse, its walls crumbling around them. This is where I ended up. Pregnant, broke, surviving. Ethan's gaze followed her hand, taking in the mattress in the corner, the crate of documents, the life she'd been forced into. Let me help, he said, his voice raw. Not for me, for you, for Elijah. Zara laughed, bitter and sharp. Help? You think a check or a press conference fixes this? She stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. If you want the truth, it's in those papers. But you won't like what you find. Your empire's built on lies, Ethan Caldwell. She turned away, her shoulders trembling, her hand resting on her belly. Go back to your tower. Leave me alone. Ethan stood frozen, her words echoing in the hollow space. He wanted to argue, to promise justice, but the weight of her pain silenced him. He looked at the crate, the papers spilling out, proof of his sister's crimes, proof of Zara's courage. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. Not until I understand everything. Zara didn't turn, but her silence was answer enough. Ethan picked up a folder, his hands trembling as he opened it. This wasn't just about Zara anymore. It was about the truth and the man he'd choose to be. The boardroom of Caldwell Enterprises was a cathedral of power, its mahogany table gleaming under the harsh glow of recessed lights. Ethan Caldwell stood at its head, his bandage gone, but the shadow of the alley attack etched into his face. The folder of Zara Mitchell's documents, dog-eared, stained, but undeniable, lay spread across the table, each page a silent accusation. He'd spent the night in that crumbling warehouse with Zara, her words searing into him. Your empire's built on lies. Now those lies were about to be exposed. His sister, Lauren Caldwell, sat across from him, her tailored blazer pristine, her green eyes cool as she sipped coffee, unaware of the storm brewing. The board members, faces flickering on the massive video screen, waited in restless silence. Ethan's heart pounded, but his voice was steady. Today, he'd reclaim the truth. He'd left the warehouse at dawn, Zara's final words echoing. Go back to your tower. Leave me alone. But Ethan couldn't leave it. Not her pain, not the proof she'd guarded through years of ruin. The documents detailed Lauren's scheme. Millions funneled to offshore accounts, environmental audits faked, Zara's career destroyed to keep it buried. Ethan had cross-checked every file, every email, on his private server away from Lauren's reach. The evidence was ironclad, and it pointed to his sister. His assistant, James, stood by the door, pale and fidgeting, clutching a tablet. Sir, he whispered, the press is already outside. If this goes public, the stock could crash. Ethan's jaw tightened. Let it. He turned to the board, his voice calm but unyielding. 3 years ago, Zara Mitchell, a data analyst at this company, uncovered financial misconduct in our renewable energy project. She reported it, and instead of an investigation, she was fired, blacklisted, and left homeless. Gas rippled through the room, virtual and real. Lauren's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips, her smile faltering. Ethan, she said, her voice smooth but edged. What is this about? He slid a folder across the table, its contents spilling out. Screenshots, bank records, her own signature on Zara's dismissal. You tell me, Lauren. Her eyes darted to the papers, her composure cracking like thin ice. This is absurd, she said, forcing a laugh. That girl was a troublemaker, fabricating data to stir drama. You're taking her word over mine? Ethan's gaze didn't waver. I'm taking the evidence. Millions siphoned offshore, audits falsified, and you signed off on it all. You buried her report, Lauren. You buried her. The board members shifted, murmurs crackling through the screen. Lauren's face darkened, her voice low. You're making a mistake, Ethan. You don't know what you're digging into. I know exactly what I'm digging into, Ethan said, his voice rising. You destroyed a woman's life to protect your scam. She saved mine, and you made her pay for it. He turned to the screen, addressing the board. Effective immediately, Lauren Caldwell is suspended pending a full investigation into ethics violations, fraud, and obstruction. The room went still, the air thick with shock. Lauren stood, her chair scraping, her eyes blazing. You're throwing away our family for some homeless nobody? Ethan leaned forward, his voice cold. She's not a nobody, and you're not my family if you think truth is disposable. Lauren's hands trembled, but she straightened, her smile a mask of defiance. You'll regret this, she hissed, storming out, her heels clicking like gunfire. Ethan exhaled, his shoulders heavy but his resolve unbroken. He turned to James. Get Zara. Tell her I need her here. James hesitated, his voice low. Sir, she might not come. She was adamant about staying away. Ethan nodded, his eyes distant. Tell her it's not for me. It's for the truth. Hours later, the press room buzzed with chaos. Cameras flashing, reporters jostling, microphones thrust forward like spears. Ethan stood at the podium, his tie loosened, his face raw with a vulnerability he'd never shown. The crowd hushed as the doors opened, and Zara Mitchell stepped in. Her long black hair was pulled back, her brown skin radiant under the harsh lights, her simple navy dress accentuating her pregnant frame. She carried herself with quiet strength, one hand resting on her belly, her eyes scanning the room. Not with fear, but with purpose. Ethan met her gaze, offering a chair. She didn't take it, standing tall beside him. You didn't have to come, he said quietly. I know, Zara replied, her voice steady, but I'm done running. Ethan faced the cameras, his voice clear, unwavering. 3 years ago, Zara Mitchell exposed serious misconduct at Caldwell Enterprises. Instead of listening, we silenced her. My sister, Lauren Caldwell, orchestrated her dismissal, smeared her name, and left her to survive on the streets. I failed her, too. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, pens scribbling furiously. Today, I'm owning that failure. We're launching a full investigation into the fraud Zara uncovered, and we'll make it right. Not just for her, but for everyone our company has wronged. He stepped back, gesturing to Zara. She hesitated, her breath catching, then stepped to the podium. The room fell silent, every eye on her. "I never wanted revenge," she said, her voice firm, resonating with a strength that stilled the chaos. "I wanted acknowledgement. I was 24, a data analyst who believed in this company. I found evidence of millions stolen, lies told, and I paid for it with my home, my future, my name." Her hand rested on her belly, her eyes glistening but unyielding. "I'm here for my son, Elijah, and for every woman told she doesn't belong in rooms like this. Truth isn't disposable, neither am I." The room erupted, gasps, applause, cameras flashing like a storm. Zara stood unshaken, her presence a beacon, no longer the homeless nobody, but a symbol of resilience. Ethan watched her, his chest tight with awe and shame. She wasn't just his savior, she was a force that had exposed his world's rot. Reporters shouted questions, but Zara stepped back, her eyes meeting Ethan's for a brief moment, a silent acknowledgement, not of forgiveness, but of shared purpose. As the press conference ended, Ethan caught her arm gently outside the room, away from the cameras. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, "for coming, for speaking." Zara's eyes searched his, wary but softening. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I did it for Elijah. For me." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I know, but I'm going to make this right, Zara. Not just today, but every day after." She studied him, her expression unreadable, then turned away, her silhouette fading into the crowd. Back in the boardroom, Ethan sat alone, the folder still open, its pages a map of his company's sins. Lauren was gone, her office sealed, her legacy unraveling. The board had already greenlit the investigation, auditors poring over the offshore accounts. But Ethan's mind was on Zara, her voice, her strength, the life she carried. He'd torn down one wall today, but the real work was just beginning. For the first time in years, he felt not like a CEO, but a man with a debt he could never fully repay. And he was ready to try. Spring painted Chicago's streets with tentative warmth, the snow giving way to budding trees and the hum of renewal. Where the crumbling warehouse on West Madison once stood, a new structure rose, steel beams gleaming, glass panels catching the morning light. The Elijah Mitchell Center for Hope was more than a building. It was a promise, a monument to a woman's courage and a man's awakening. Ethan Caldwell stood at its entrance, no longer in his tailored suits, but in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, his hands in his pockets, his eyes tracing the sign bearing Zara Mitchell's son's name. The center, funded by Caldwell Enterprises, was a haven for the homeless and the silenced. Those like Zara, who'd been cast aside but never broken. Today was its opening, and Ethan felt like a guest in a story he'd only begun to understand. Inside, the center buzzed with life. Volunteers arranging chairs, youth mentors setting up computers, architects finalizing plans for a community garden. Zara Mitchell moved through the chaos with quiet authority, her long black hair braided neatly, her radiant brown skin glowing under the soft lights. Her navy dress, simple but elegant, hugged her now slimmer frame, her newborn son, Elijah, nestled in a sling against her chest. She held a clipboard, directing a team of former Caldwell interns, now fully funded through a new diversity program she designed. Her eyes, once haunted by betrayal, now carried a fire tempered by hope. Ethan watched her from a distance, his chest tight with a mix of awe and humility. She was no longer the ghost from the alley. She was a force, reshaping the world one step at a time. The press conference 3 months ago had changed everything. Zara's words, "Truth isn't disposable, neither am I," had ignited a firestorm. News outlets ran her story for weeks, whistleblowers silenced, now vindicated. Lauren Caldwell's suspension had led to her resignation, her offshore accounts exposed, her reputation in tatters. The board, under Ethan's relentless push, had overhauled the company's ethics policies, with Zara's input shaping new transparency measures. But for Ethan, the real change wasn't in the headlines or the stock reports. It was in him. He'd spent years building an empire, blind to its cracks. Zara had forced him to see, not just with her evidence, but with her courage, her refusal to let hate define her. He approached her now, his steps hesitant, a small gift bag in his hand. The center's lobby smelled of fresh paint and coffee, voices overlapping in a hum of purpose. Zara looked up, her eyes meeting his, no longer wary but cautious, assessing. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Didn't expect you to ditch the suit." He chuckled, a sound raw with relief. "Figured I'd try fitting in for once." He held out the bag, his fingers brushing hers as she took it. Inside was a tiny onesie, blue and soft, embroidered with the words, "My mom's a hero." Zara's laugh was soft, genuine, the first he'd heard from her. "Elijah's gonna outgrow this in a week," she said, but her eyes shimmered with something warm. She adjusted the sling, Elijah's tiny hand curling against her chest. "You doing okay?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter, searching her face. Zara nodded, her gaze steady. "More than okay. This place—" She gestured to the bustling room, the volunteers, the walls lined with art from local kids. "This is what I fought for. Not just for me, but for him. For everyone like us." Ethan followed her gaze, seeing the center through her eyes. A refuge, a second chance. "You built this," he said, his voice low. "Not me." Zara shook her head, her braid swaying. "You didn't have to fund it, Ethan. You didn't have to listen." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "You changed." The words hit him harder than he expected. A validation he hadn't known he needed. He swallowed, his throat tight. "You saved me, Zara. Not just in that alley, but from who I was. I was blind. About Lauren, about the company, about you." He looked down, his hands clenching. "I'm still learning how to see." Zara studied him, her expression softening but not yielding. "You don't get a medal for doing what's right," she said, her voice firm but kind. "But you're here. That's something." She turned, directing a volunteer to adjust a banner, her presence commanding without effort. Ethan watched, struck by her strength, her ability to build from ashes. He'd spent years chasing control, wealth, power, but Zara had shown him something greater, purpose born from pain. The ribbon-cutting ceremony began, a small crowd gathering outside. Local leaders, former interns, people from the shelters Zara had served. She stepped to the podium, Elijah stirring in his sling, and spoke with a clarity that silenced the murmurs. "This center is for the invisible," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "For the people told they don't matter. It's named for my son, Elijah, because he's why I kept fighting. Truth isn't just a word, it's a foundation." Applause erupted, hands clapping, phones recording. Ethan stood at the back, his heart swelling with a pride that wasn't his own. She was a beacon, her radiance undeniable, her story rewriting the narrative of a city that had overlooked her. After the ceremony, as volunteers mingled and kids ran through the lobby, Ethan found Zara by the cornerstone, a plaque reading Elijah Mitchell Center for Hope S 2026. She traced the letters, her fingers lingering on her son's name. "What now?" Ethan asked, standing beside her, his voice soft. Zara looked up, her eyes clear, resolute. "Now we build. Not just walls, but futures." She paused, a faint smile breaking through. "And you? What's next for Ethan Caldwell?" He exhaled, the question heavier than it seemed. "I'm learning," he said. "Learning to listen, to see the cracks before they break someone else." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "I want to help, Zara. Not as a CEO, but as me." She looked at his hand, then at him, her gaze piercing but warm. After a moment, she took it, her grip firm, her touch grounding. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said, but her smile softened the warning. They stood together, the center's hum around them, a future taking shape in the space where a warehouse once decayed. Ethan felt the weight of his past, his silence, his sister's crimes, his company's failures, but also a spark of possibility. Zara had saved him, not just from death, but from a life blind to truth. And she, with Elijah in her arms and a vision in her heart, was building something that would outlast them both. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden light through the center's windows, Ethan looked at Zara, her braid catching the glow, her son's soft breaths a quiet rhythm. "You're not the woman I ignored anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you're not the man who walked past me," she replied, her eyes meeting his. The moment wasn't awkward or heavy, but full, a shared understanding, a foundation for something new. The Elijah Mitchell Center stood as proof. From one woman's truth, a revolution could begin. This story of Zara Mitchell and Ethan Caldwell is a testament to the power of truth, courage, and redemption. From a desperate act in a Chicago alley to the rise of the Elijah Mitchell Center for Hope, it shows how one woman's resilience can dismantle an empire's lies and inspire a new beginning. Zara's unwavering strength and Ethan's transformation remind us that change is possible, even in the face of betrayal, and that every voice matters. If this journey of justice and hope moved you, share your thoughts below. Tell us what it sparked in you, wherever you're watching from. Thank you for joining us in this story of heart and grit. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and we'll see you in the next tale, where truth continues to light the way.